I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and I'm here with a fun over-dyeing project. Today we're going to over-dye this super bulky 100% merino wool single ply yarn. And this is a yarn that I bought that already has color on it. It has a beautiful variegated colorway. But sometimes you might find a yarn base that you like on clearance, but it might not be the colors that you want. Maybe it's very warm toned and you want to transition it into something that's cooler toned. And so you can absolutely do that. You can absolutely dye yarn that has already been dyed. And later in the video, I'll talk to you about some recommendations about how to go and pick the best yarn for over-dyeing. But for now, let's take a closer look at this yarn. This yarn base is Alla Prima in the colorway Sun Haze. It has some of the original bear color within hints of a very reddish pink and a more neutral orange throughout it. Honestly, looking at this yarn, it almost reminds me of something you could dye with Kool-Aid, say starting with little bits of diluted cherry and orange. It gives me that sort of vibe to it. With the yarn laid flat, you can get a little more sense for how the colorway works. We've got these lovely splotches of color that don't go all the way through or all the way around the strand. And the colors I'm planning on over dyeing this with are fairly bold. I'm planning to dip dye this into 2 different colors. And so we may or may not feel these original colors through in the final product. It depends on, I feel like we maybe will still see some modeling, but it might be hard to feel that in the finished yarn. But I'm excited to get started. Sometimes in an over-dyeing video, I like to take a snip of yarn near the end because that'll tell us about the transformation. But I'm not doing that today because the ends here are very white, the natural bear color. And also there's so little yardage on this yarn that I don't want to lose any of it. All I can do is do my best to represent this colorway accurately so we can see what we transform it into. I've added on a removable nylon zip tie to be an extra tie for us today. It's a convenient way to hold on to the yarn. And I am planning on pre-soaking this yarn in just some cool tap water overnight. It is not the most absorbent yarn, so I have a feeling that I'm going to need to press it down a little bit more. Ideally, I want the fibers to be well saturated so that way we can get not just good coverage of the yarn itself, but hopefully we can get that color to penetrate within these really thick, super bulky strands. I'm not worried about any of this commercial colorway bleeding out. And so in theory, I could add some other yarn to it for the pre-soak. I don't think I need to, but I could. So anyway, I guess I'll see you tomorrow when we're ready to start setting up our dip dyeing dye bath. These are slightly old dye stocks of Dharma's Midnight Blue and Emerald Green. I both originally mixed them at a 1% strength, or 1 gram of dye dissolved in 100 milliliters of total volume. Sometimes when you have older dye stocks, some of the dye might crash out of solution, settle towards the bottom, and so occasionally that concentration is not quite as accurate as it may have been at the beginning. So I just want to throw that out there. But let's go ahead and measure out some of these colors. Before measuring out the dye, you want to shake up the bottle really, really well. And I think I want to go with 40 milliliters approximately of each color. So 40 milliliters of our emerald green, and then about 40 milliliters of the midnight blue. So since we're dip dyeing, some of these colors will be more concentrated at one end than the other, but the total depth of shade, not a local depth of shade, would be a total of 0.8 grams of dye on our 100 grams of yarn. In this pot I have 16 cups of hot water. I just turned on my electric hot plate, so it's going to take a little bit of time to bring it to a boil again. But let's add some acid to this. Let's do 6 tablespoons of white vinegar. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and my vinegar is 5% acetic acid. And then I'm going to take our midnight blue dye and add this into the water. Emerald green will take longer to strike, and so I'm going to use that second. I'm going to rinse out that cup. And now I just have to be patient. We can start dip dyeing when things are warm. Certainly things are warm here, but we will just try to be as patient as we can. You know, I just remembered this is not 100 grams, it's 120 grams. So we have 0.8 grams of dye per 120 grams of yarn. So that will bring us a total that is closer to 0.67 grams of dye per 100 grams of yarn, just for those ratios if that's something that you want to keep track of. But anyway, we can get ready to dip dye in this in just a moment. The first thing I need to do, I know you're a little bit off camera, is gently squeeze out a lot of the excess water because we want this to soak up our hot water. Okay, and let's see what this midnight blue does on top of these colors. Ooh! So far I see the red through, but I don't know how much that will happen. Now, this is non-superwash yarn, and I'm realizing that I probably should have brought over a step stool to help me. This is non-superwash yarn, so I do want to be careful with felting, but I have dip dyed a lot of non-superwash yarn in my day, and it should be okay. Okay, we are going to set this down real quick. I'm going to get a step stool and come back. Okay, and I want the step stool so that way I'm not raising my arm over my head. Even though that may have given us a bit of a demarcation line, it still looks like there's a ton of pigment in here, but the further up we go, you can see that we're getting less and less of the blue on the yarn. But at that deepest end, I do actually see some reds coming through, but most of it is not. Okay, we are actually starting to clear nicely. There is very little pigment left in here at this stage. When I lift up, I'm not seeing very much at all. So what I'm going to do is I am going to check the temperature of the side of that, leave this out. Hopefully it won't wick out a lot of water, and I'm going to let this sit for about, ooh, how long? Because I could just go ahead and add the green to this. I'm going to let this sit for 5 to 10 minutes just to see how much more of that color will absorb. Alright, it's been a little bit of time and I have reduced the heat, and we are definitely dripping a little bit from our other end. Oh, but our dye bath looks clear. Oh, that tie stuck out a little bit. Okay, I'm going to try to set this aside. And oof, I don't want to felt anything, but I do want to go ahead and get started on the next color. So what I'm going to do is carefully move the zip tie down so that way the zip tie is done at the other end. But before we move on, let me zoom in here. In some of these intermediate colors, you see some of those reds and oranges peeking through still. And I do see some hints of it in the darkest areas as well. I'm curious how much of it we might see once we deal with our green, because I have a feeling we might cover up things a little bit more. But it's not a bad thing to have some of those original colors still peeking through. So that was our 40 milliliters of emerald. And I'm going to rinse out our cup. And we're going to start dip dyeing this other side. Okay, and let's dip dye this other side. Oh, that green is so pretty. Now, if you want to make sure that you preserve some of what's left in the original colorway versus covering it up, you can definitely do that. You just need to maybe use even less dye and go for something where you're trying to build the color up slowly. So if you start for example, with a lot less dye and you add more and more and more, you can make sure that you are preserving some of those intermediate colors. But I tried to pick something that would contrast and be like separate on the color wheel And so I think what this is gonna do is give us some really incredible dimension into our yarn, because it's gonna give us almost some brown notes on the green. Now, this green can take a while to strike. And so I think I might want to add more acid just right now. 1, 2, 3 and a bit tablespoons of white vinegar. If this yarn were superwash, it would absorb the color a little bit faster, but the fact that it's non-superwash means that the colors are going to strike slower, but also the surface area of the yarn is less. Because this is a super bulky yarn, it's going to take more time. Okay, good. Still separating. It's going to take more time for these colors to bind to our yarn, because they may need to go into the center of the fibers, and that just takes longer. It's like if you have a yarn cake, it's going to take longer to absorb the color than it would if you just have straight dye. And so this isn't to say that, say, like lace weight would soak up dye faster, but it can take longer with greens or any color. It can take longer for colors to bind depending on that color. But I'm going to try to have this just sitting out a little lightly. Is that what I want to do? I mean, most of the color is in the yarn. Yeah, I think that I might go ahead and let this sit for a little bit before I go ahead and add all of the yarn into the dyed hot. There may end up being some green in the yarn in the end, which is totally okay, but let's go ahead and give this about 10 minutes and then I'll come back. I went to sit down and the yarn fell in. So, okay, here's the way we'll do it. We'll have it sit on the tongs so it actually stays out. Oh my goodness, that was so funny. There's still like 8 minutes left on the timer. Okay, let's see. I'm gonna have to, this is why removable zip ties are great. I can release this, and there's a little bit of green left in. I feel like it's less. I do see some hints of some of the reds, especially on the green. But I'm gonna go ahead and add all of this yarn into the pot. And we're gonna heat this for 20 more minutes. Then I'm gonna turn off the heat and let the yarn cool in the pot for a little while. So it will have had a total of 30 minutes of heat from when I last added dye. If you're buying yarn specifically with the intent to over dye it, to transform it into something else, I like to look around for pastels. The lighter the color, the more muted the color, the more neutral the color, the easier it will be to transform it into whatever you want. If you start with something that is really saturated like a red, it's going to be really hard to transform that into a blue and green colorway, because that red is going to be a part of whatever you create. When you're dyeing yarn, the color that you're adding is additive sort of to the base color. So even though I might talk about covering up a color, really you're adding something to the color that was there, and it's sort of translucent, but that doesn't quite work, but you'll see what was there originally to begin with. And so that is something that you want to consider. However, if your original colorway is more pastel, then you can really take it any direction. You don't necessarily need to worry about the color that was there originally. You might see some influence from that color in the final yarn, which can be very, very beautiful, but it might not cause too much of a problem. So when I shop for these overdying videos, I also tend to go and I shopped for these during the Knit Picks big sale, and I looked for yarn that was heavily discounted and then in colors I thought would be fun for overdying. And I mean, if I have a specific video in mind, then I might pay full price, but if I'm gonna pay full price, I may as well just go and buy the bare undyed yarn, because that really is the most blank canvas that you have. And while I recommend getting a pastel, don't be afraid of a neon green or a neon yellow. these two can be transformed and you can create something that is more your vibe. It's just, if a color is super dark to begin with, it can be a lot harder to transform that. And so you want to take that into consideration as well, that if you buy black yarn, you're not going to turn that into a neon pink. That's not going to happen. But you can get an eggplant purple yarn and add a dark color to it to give the colorway more depth and dimension. So there's always things that you can do. But anyway, let's get back to our yarn. The yarn has been in here cooling off for a while. It isn't yet room temperature, but it is significantly cooler compared to where it was. And ooh, see, you can see some of those red-orange notes in there. So I'm gonna set this yarn aside so it can finish cooling completely. Let's wash our overdyed yarn, but you see that like hint of red through there? Oh, so pretty. All right, I'm popping this into some water. I'm gonna add a little bit of dish soap. Kind of work that through, and we're gonna let it soak for a minute or two. I had to remove some yarn from my spin dryer, and I'm very happy to report that I'm not seeing any color come out of our yarn. That rinse water is clear. So now I just need to rinse out the soap. I'm gonna fill this basin, put it in to rinse out the soap, then I'll put the yarn through my spin dryer and hang it up to dry. But I may as well just show you. Just a quick rinse. I don't want to squeeze it or rub it too much because I don't want to cause any felting. But we really did transform this yarn. Eek! I'll see you when it's dry. Here is the finished dry yarn. Over at our midnight blue end, and especially since we're slightly overexposed, you can see some hints of some of those warm colors peeking through. A lot of this is a little more apparent, especially some of this orange, as we go into the lighter section in the middle and continue on into the greens. These don't detract from our cool toned, sort of repeating gradient variegated colorway. It just adds a little bit of depth and dimension. Now, if we wanted to cover these colors completely, we could have used a lot more dye, but I don't mind, and I didn't mind some of the original colors showing through in the end. Now, happily, the yarn did not felt. I mean, I suppose there could be a slight fulling of the strands itself, but that is not something that will inhibit the ability to knit or anything, and it's not like you could spin this yarn further because it had twist in it. And so, yeah, the yarn turned out beautiful. So what should you do if you don't want to see any of those warm tones coming through? Well, this could go back to picking the skein of yarn that you want to overdye. If you have a choice between a pastel red and orange, sort of on a white backdrop, and something that is deeper, say grays or more cool toned, even if those colors are darker, then you should lean for the slightly darker one, get some more variation, but then you know you'll be able to keep the cool tones. However, looking at this twisted up, you don't notice those pops of warmth, and I think that it's going to just add some beauty to the finished product. And so I hope that this also shows that you are not limited to sticking within the color family of the yarn that was there to begin with when it comes to overdyeing. You can pick something on the opposite side of the color wheel. It's just, you want the tone of what you're overdyeing to be deeper. Unless you really want those original colors to show through, in which case then you would want to overdye with something that isn't as deep, so that way you would still feel more of those original colors in there. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and I have a lot more yarn in my stash that I could overdye. Typically during the Knit Picks big sale in November, right before Thanksgiving, that is a time when I might stock up and pick yarn specifically for overdyeing, because you can find skeins of yarn that are up to 60% off, and I believe that the ones that I'm showing early this year are all from that sale. But there might be times you decide that you want to overdye a yarn, even if it's full price, because you want to have that depth in there, and that is a valid choice to start with already. Just remember that you can always add on more color, but you can't take color away. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits. Please subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. And if you want to help support the content here on another level, I have a Patreon. Go and check out the ChemKnits Patreon for a lot of fun perks that can include early access to new content, behind the scenes sneak peeks, permanent coupons to the ChemKnits Creations Etsy shop, and more. You can find more information over at patreon.com/ChemKnits. Thank you so much for watching.